and I'm going to kind of take you behind the scenes a little bit in terms of a development that I'm working on right now. And essentially, we got some bad news last week. Okay, so I'm not going to go into all the details, but what I thought I would do is more than anything, I don't know what that is. More than anything, what I thought I would do is kind of walk through the thinking process and my own kind of journey, if you will, right? So, generally speaking, when things don't go well or something kind of unexpected pops up, the natural reaction that I have is either anger, frustration, blame, something along those lines, right? And I know that that's not productive. And so I kind of had to take a step back and essentially I went to like counsel, even though not counsel that, not like mentors that actually I get on the phone with. I literally went to Jocko Willick, Extreme Ownership, and bought another one of his books. And then the second one was Ray Dalio's Principles. And I'm going to kind of more focus on the principles side of things because in his book, he actually describes when making mistakes, how he actually has like a process for dealing with those, right? And so, one of the big takeaways that I really kind of learned from this experience was number one, kind of get the emotion out of it. And that is not always easy, right? It usually almost takes like a day or 2 days to kind of detach. Detach is something that Jocko talks about, but then to let the emotions pass and really focus on accurate and inaccurate facts, information. Okay. And what Ray talks about is pain plus reflection equals progress. And so I'm going to kind of share with you kind of the steps that I went through. And then I will talk a little bit about one of the big challenges, if you will, that I noticed, and hopefully it will shed some light and maybe you'll learn something from it. Maybe not. Okay, so step one is I went back through like 16 months of emails, PDFs, leases, construction budgets, internal budgets, pro formas, what we sent to people. I looked at interest rates when the hikes were happening because a lot can happen in 16 months. And I mean, in the past 16 months, a lot has happened, right? And so what I did is I basically just tracked everything into both spreadsheets and a Word document, as well as my journal, because I really couldn't get it off my mind, right? I mean, this is something that is fairly significant, and I really wanted to understand it for a few different reasons. Number one, I'm going to have to talk to my partners, and number two, I'm going to have to talk to my investors, right? And I don't like to just bring problems. I want to bring a solution, and um, I'm not looking for excuses or reasons as to why it happened. I'm more looking at, okay, like here is the journey. Is where, here's where we screwed up. Here's why we screwed up, and here's what we're going to do to fix it. And through this whole process, I was actually able to uncover a lot of interesting things that, well, we'll get into that here in a second. Actually, it is number two. So step two is creating a memo to my investors and partners. And yeah, so this kind of ties into number three. And so this memo essentially is um, it's not a story. It's essentially like here are the facts and here's what happened. But then more importantly, what I did is I actually broke out every single place that I feel that we went wrong. And so in this case, I think there was about 17 what I call, well, I didn't create this, Ray Dalio did. He calls it his issue log, right? I had a, it's interesting. So before I read the book, and maybe it was because I'd read it years ago, but I created a notes in my phone, and I'm not going to repeat it here because I don't try to refrain from using any vulgarity on the podcast. But I basically created this notes tab, and I started to just jot down all the areas that I thought that I had basically screwed up, right? Or where we as a team screwed up, right? Because not everything would have been necessarily on me, but as the developer, ultimately it does fall on my shoulders. And so the one big challenge that I thought was most interesting was because there's lots of different little line items and some kind of relate to others. But what I really found was that the biggest issue was that I was too optimistic. And I'm going to kind of describe what I mean by that. And I could be wrong, right? Because I have not discussed this with my partners yet. I will be doing that this week. We've had kind of preliminary conversations, but I really feel that if I take a step back and I look at this deal and what happened, I feel that because I was too optimistic, I was constantly looking for a way to make this deal work. And I didn't ask the right question, which is this deal kind of worth doing? Is this deal based on the new information we have, right? Because let's face it, sometimes through the life cycle of an opportunity, new information is going to come up. And I was almost too focused on the outcome versus being somewhat removed and just being impartial, right? And I will say this is very difficult to do. You have to think like if you've put $1 million into a project, you've spent 8 months and tons of energy and effort, and you have leases, you have there's a lot that goes into these projects and developments. To take a step back and say, is this still worth going forward on? I feel it almost requires like an impartial mentor, third party, someone else that can be kind of on your board of advisors that understands commercial real estate and can really press you on some of these more challenging questions. And it's not to say that they would have been able to sway me one way or another. However, it definitely would have maybe opened my eyes to just different paths forward. Okay. And so I think that this being too optimistic is probably the biggest lesson that I took away from this. It's something that, look, I don't think in April of 2021 when we started, interest rates, like we had just done a project and it was in that kind of 2.5 to 3% for term financing on a commercial project. Fast forward to today, we'd be over 6%. And so we were certainly not stress testing our interest rates to handle that type of a rise, if you will. But going forward, I will certainly start to consider that, especially depending on the length of time of that development. What's interesting, I'll just kind of throw this in. When I was at Sun Life and I was a commercial underwriter, we had, I can't remember what they actually called it, but there was some term that they used, and it was essentially like how high we would stress test. And so if I'm just going by memory, let's just say back in the day when I was there in kind of '06 era, that the interest rates were in that, I want to say 5 to 6%, and we would stress test it all the way to 9% just to see. Now, it never went into any type of pro forma or any kind of presentation to the board or whoever it was that was going to, the investment committee. However, it was just in the back of our mind that we could push interest rates this high, and we would look at what the debt cover ratio was with interest rates. And I always thought back then that was crazy, if you will, right? In terms of like, why would you push it so far? Well, I suppose if you lived through the 80s and you saw interest rates go to 12 and 15%, then 9% may not seem that crazy. And so I think just having a few takeaways, right? So this is hopefully what will be helpful for you, right? Because I'm not giving you like the nuts and bolts of this project because it's irrelevant. It really comes down to the lessons that you could potentially apply to your own investing business, right? And so the first is, just having someone outside that can ask you questions so that you're not, obviously we're invested in a deal because we like it. And so it's very difficult to be impartial. So that's kind of the first thing. Number two, and this is something that I just kind of wrote down, and that is, a lot of people talk about how it's better to learn from someone else's lessons. And while I agree with that, I can tell you that it really doesn't sink in until you experience something emotionally and viscerally where, you don't sleep or you can't eat for weeks, or like you actually have to pump more money into a deal, whatever it happens to be, like when you actually experience it for yourself, I believe the lessons go in like so much deeper, and ideally you will never make that same mistake again, right? And I think Ray Dalio talks about it, and someone else, I'm trying to think who it was, it might have been Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger or something to that effect, where they basically had like a high level manager that made like a $10 million mistake, and the guy thought he was going to get fired, right? $10 million, like that's a lot of money, doesn't matter when it happened. And the CEO basically said, you know, I basically just paid $10 million for you to learn that lesson, and there's no way I'm going to fire you, type of thing. And so like I never really understood or appreciated that, but now having gone through this kind of experience, and who knows, maybe I'll share more about it in the future. But I can tell you that um, the past week and creating these new templates, these new exercises, these new questions, going through this issue log that I have right now, it is definitely going to make me a far more, a far better developer, investor, how I evaluate risk, how I look at opportunities. And as one of my business partners says, Mark, he says basically assume everything is screwed up until you can prove otherwise. And I would say that I had the flip side where I trusted what people said until proven otherwise. And in development and investing, I feel that that is not the right approach, okay, or at least the approach I'm going to take. So, anyways, hopefully this was helpful. I know it's not the kind of more upbeat topic. However, it's what happens in real estate. I'm not saying it happens to everybody. This is something that is kind of unique in that most of my projects do go well, and even when things kind of go, excuse me, go off the rails, we have enough contingency and buffer baked in that that we're able to absorb it. But in this case, it's we're definitely going to be able to deal with it and get through it. However, it is a very it's disappointing and challenging. And so, if it's something that I spent this much time and effort learning, I thought I might share it. And if it helps one person avoid or at least deal with setbacks, then it was worth it. So that's all I got. Have a great day, week, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.